Hello, good afternoon, good morning, depending on where you're tuning in from. But we are thrilled to have you for today's SportTechie Live, our golf technology roundtable. Next week, of course, is the U.S. Open at Torrey Pines, and so we'll get on that, some of the elite play, and also touch on the consumer space a bit. But I'd love to introduce our panelists. We have Tyler Burnett, a marketing manager at FlightScope, Brett Sergalis, a veteran sports writer and author, formerly the New York Post. He's got a great book you should all check out. David Dusek, the senior writer at Golf Week and my former Sports Illustrated colleague. And joining us also is Sal Syed, the CEO of Arcos. Thanks to all of you for joining. I think we should start with the U.S. Open. Any particular trends that you guys are looking at? And in particular, we all love the weather in San Diego. How is the environment going to play in, and how is everyone going to prepare for that? I know maybe we'll start with Tyler. I know FlightScope's environmental optimizer is something that Bryson swears by. In fact, even inspired. So Tyler, what do you think?
Yeah, thanks for having me, first off. But yeah, I think, like you said, I think it's because the weather is so good in San Diego. It's sort of just figuring out the differences between where you practice and where you're playing the rest of the year versus what it's at in Torrey. So in our software, and something that Bryson helped us come up with is like you mentioned, the environmental optimizer, where he can do a practice range session on his driving range in Dallas, take that data and plug in each condition that it'll be in Torrey. So for example, if the temperature is going to be 75 degrees, he can enter that. If the wind is going to be 10 miles an hour in his face, he can enter that. Humidity, landing height. So if there's elevations on the course, things like that, where he can actually see two data parameters. So he can get his carry distance and all the other data for the environment that he has in Dallas versus the environment at Torrey. So I think what him and a lot of guys do, with their caddies, is they take their averages and their range sessions on where they're normally playing, and sort of plan and prepare for what it is before they get there, so that they know, kind of at least a feel for it for when they're doing practice rounds.
Great, thanks. David, I know you are one of the fortunate few going out there. What are you looking forward to at Torrey?
Well, sort of jumping on what Tyler said, the guys will be tweaking and modifying the actual clubs that are going to be in their bag based on the conditions that they find at Torrey Pines. Now, it's going to be obviously right on the Pacific Ocean. The air is typically heavy. The ball doesn't fly as far in heavy, moist air as it does in dry conditions. That's why when you play in the desert, the ball seems to go forever, and you play on Long Island, or in this case, along the Pacific Ocean, it doesn't go as far. So many players will not just bring the 14 clubs that they have in their bag, but they will bring upwards of 20 to 21 clubs and come up with some type of a permutation or a different sort of a setup that they're going to have to sort of optimize out the performance that they're going to get. They'll have certain clubs for very specific holes. And with the improved manufacturing tolerances and the way that companies are actually able to make golf equipment and really specialize it using launch monitors like FlightScope, using different pieces of data that they've collected using ShotLink, they know pretty much what the performance they're going to get from every club in their bag is going to be. And it becomes this jigsaw puzzle where, like, okay, the first hole at Torrey Pines, they can play those holes virtually and then have a map and set up their equipment and all the gear that they're going to have with them. Now, they still have to execute the shots, but they're going to be much better outfitted to be able to handle that kind of stuff. And that's something that didn't used to happen, say, 20 or 25 years ago with nearly the level of sophistication that it does now.
Mm-hmm. Brett?
Yeah, I'm always interested, especially at major championships, to see how important distance is. Bryson's proven that, the way he found, the way he's used the ShotLink data to exploit that kind of idea that distance is more important than anything. And I'm always curious about how golf courses are set up and how that plays into the distance advantage. I mean, you look at the way Wingfoot was set up, and those greens are wild, and the rough was really thick, and he still won. So is it going to be like that at Torrey, where they're known as the rough being really high and the greens are relatively flat? I don't know. Does that Bryson chipped and putted great that week? So is that going to be the same factor? So I feel like that is at the forefront forefront of so many people's minds watching, especially major championships. Where is distance going to play? How important is distance going to be in terms of determining who wins? So that's kind of where I'm always thinking in spots like this.
Mm-hmm. And Sal, a lot of what Arcos does, of course, is to bring those elite characteristics down to the consumers. How can someone playing? How can someone who's not one of the PGA pros use some of this information and take advantage of the weather and the course?
You got to get off mute first. I will say, to Brett's point, like in terms of what's going to happen, Bryson and any long hitter is going to have generally more of an advantage the higher you grow the rough, and the narrower the fairways you make, because they're hitting shorter clubs out of the rough, and so in the ball you can advance the ball a little bit easier with the shorter clubs out of the rough compared to longer clubs, which will there'll be more deceleration when it's getting into the rough. And that shows up actually, at least for us when we look at strokes gain, without getting into all the geeky details right now, essentially the advantage for longer hitters is amplified the higher you go the rough, the tighter you make the fairways. And with Bryson, I would say it's even more interesting because his shorter clubs are actually the same length as his longer clubs. So the club head speed that he generates with a pitching wedge is higher than what other PGA Tour pros generate with their variable length, so shorter pitching wedges. So he actually has an even better advantage out of the rough compared to the average long hitter. So that's going to be interesting. I think he does have a distinct advantage on the U.S. Open setup, and that's why we saw that success that we did. So it'll be interesting to see that. But from an average golfer standpoint, I would say don't play in U.S. Open rough. It's no fun. Just don't do it. In fact, we to neutralize the difference between higher and lower handicappers, I would, and for pace of play reasons, that we've seen it in their data, I would encourage courses to keep their rough shorter. Because it allows people who are higher handicap, shorter hitters, to compete with people who are longer hitters. Because I think intuitively you can think about trying to hit, say, a 5-iron from a 4-inch rough. You're dead. It's not going to go anywhere. Versus trying to hit a 5-iron from or compared to hitting an 8-iron out of that rough, you can still hack that out. 5-iron, you literally can't get club on the ball. And so if somebody's 30 yards shorter and they're hitting a 5-iron out of that rough versus somebody 30 yard longer, it's a big difference. So I think keeping rough heights to 2 inches or 2 1/4, something like that. I think that's what I would encourage most courses do, and also help you find your ball faster and keep pace of play going.
Joe, to jump on just one of the points that Sal was making, there's a huge mistake that many of the governing bodies that were frightened when Tiger Woods wins in '97 at the Masters. There was this, oh my gosh, this Tiger effect goes through, and they wanted to Tiger-proof golf courses, and all of a sudden we started making them longer, and we started making them tighter, and doing all these different things at the U.S. Open, at the Masters, etc., other elite tournaments, which actually the statistics have now proven was the exact wrong thing to do. If your goal is to have more players have the opportunity to win, lengthening the golf courses penalizes shorter hitters much more than it penalizes the bigger hitters. And so when courses got longer and longer and they were made more and more narrow, just like we saw at Winged Foot when Bryson won, it just amplifies his advantage. If your true goal is to have more people really have a good chance to win, you shorten the courses. You put more turns in, which dictates that players who hit it a long way can't turn it around corners. They have to hit to very specific spots. Everybody hits it to that spot. It sometimes is not the most exciting golf to watch, but the whole concept starting in the late 90s and early 2000s of lengthening golf courses for championships to, offset the increase in distance just magnified the problem even more.
Mm-hmm. We were not too far removed from the PGA Championship, and for the first time at a major, rangefinders were allowed. Laser rangefinders were allowed on the course, and the world kept spinning. But do you think I even had a chance to speak with Pedro Harrington about it, and he sort of surprised himself that he thought it worked better than he's very against, slowing down the pace of play, but he found that this all seemed to work out. We start with Brett, but what do we see this? First of all, any thoughts on the rangefinder in particular, but also do we see more technology encroaching into actual competition like this?
I mean, I don't think the rangefinder is a big deal, especially when you get out to a place like the Ocean Course where you're going to get so far offline and so far away from a sprinkler head on your hole that it's going to be very hard to come up. It's going to take a long time for the caddy to go and walk and calculate the angles, right? So, I mean, I don't think the rangefinder really takes away from any part of competition. The one thing I do find distasteful is the green reading books, because I think that does slow play down, and it takes away one of the most important skills in the history of the game, which is reading greens and understanding how they work. And I thought it was really interesting what Padraig said to you, Joe, that but when his eyes needed to get better to actually read the green book, but then when he did, it really helped him, and then he has a great finish in the PGA. It's like, well, I don't know, is that coincidence or not, or the green book really helped that much, and it might. And I feel like that when you're talking about technology and competition, I find that to be kind of the worst of it. And the rangefinders, I mean, caddies are out there using them during practice rounds, and if they really wanted to spot different parts anyway, that's not really changing the game at all. I mean, the slope and stuff, we can get into how valuable that is if we want to, but actually having the numbers, I think, is only helpful for pace of play, and it's not an advantage or disadvantage for everybody.
Tyler?
Yeah, no, I would agree with that. I think, for the most part, I think most of the caddies will do their prep anyways. So they'll do the rangefinder, but they'll do their normal process as well. And so it's sort of almost just like a fact check type thing, especially with guys like Tim Tucker, who's Bryson's caddy. They're going to do their normal prep regardless of whether he has a rangefinder or not, just to double check. So it's sort of just an added tool for them.
David?
Monday, there were 2 rain delays at the Metropolitan Golf Association's U.S. Open sectional qualifier. There were 79 guys there for 4 spots in next week's U.S. Open. So needless to say, the pressure was on and everybody was trying to do their best. The pace of play was relatively slow, but it wasn't terrible. After the second rain delay, I went out and I was following a guy named Rob Oppenheim. And there's no reason why you would know that name. He's a journeyman pro on the PGA Tour who was not into the U.S. Open and so therefore was going through sectional qualifying. On the 10th hole, he hits his drive to the left side of the fairway at Century Country Club. Beautiful place. I think Sal's probably rich enough to be a member. And he breaks out a laser rangefinder and zaps the flag distance. Now, had he not been allowed to do that in these circumstances, he or his caddy has to go on the other side of a bunker, march off that distance, go back around, figure out something, and go on. He didn't. He zaps it, and within about 15 seconds, he hits a shot, and life goes on. I agree. I think that laser rangefinder should be allowed pretty much everywhere, not the slope function, which can tell you an up or down helping distance. I also agree with Brett that the green reading books have gotten too sophisticated. They definitely slow down play, and it takes away from an inherent skill. But I don't really buy into the idea that it is a skill of golf to be able to march off from sprinkler heads or marked areas, 11 paces after I get these other things. So.
I mean, I agree with what David's saying. Like, rangefinders, to me, that's just a no-brainer. Exactly. Marching 5 paces from a sprinkler head, doing that math isn't really a golf skill, and it just I think it should be allowed in every tournament. And right now, what they're making caddies do, like in the tournaments that rangefinders aren't allowed, they're actually using slope before the round. So they're noting down what the slope numbers are. So it's not like they don't have that information. It's just, I would say, like making it seem like they don't have it. In fact, it's like a disadvantage if you're an amateur golfer. You're not going to go out to a course, like if you're playing in the U.S. Open sectional qualifier Century, you probably haven't been there before. A lot of people. You're not going to be able to go out there. Generally, you probably don't have the time to send somebody who's going to take all the slope measurements from different spots. So I think I personally think that even the slope play piece, because it's PGA Tour pros have access to that, and the others don't, should be there for the amateur golfer. Otherwise, it's not a level playing field unless you absolutely ban it completely, so it's never allowed. And I don't know how USGA would ever do that, because you can go to any course anytime, not in tournament, and use the slope piece. So that's my view. And on the green reading books, my view is I certainly believe it does slow pace of play down. So if they can do it within the stipulated time, I mean, there's a skill element to it. I've never used it personally, green reading books personally, but there's probably like skill that involved in terms of matching your line and the read and all that stuff. But I do think if it's not impacting pace of play, I would personally wouldn't be opposed to it. I do believe right now you can just see it on TV, they spend so much time reading and looking at the books and then looking at the green and all that stuff that it's negatively impacting pace of play, which I think is really important to keep pace of play for many different reasons for the health of golf.
If I can real quickly, I mean, I think putting is one of the only art forms, like straight art, that's left in the game. And when you see someone like Bryson reading the green book and then doing aim point and then still missing a putt, it's like, well, who cares? Why did we have to watch you go through all of that? Because there's so much more involved to making a putt than just the technicality and the numbers of it. And to me, that's some of the most where I get the most enjoyment watching the game, is watching somebody feel a putt and make it. And it's way less enjoyable to watch Bryson do aim point and read the green book and make a 4-footer. It's just not. I think it's really missing part of the game.
Well, and Brett, I can tell you from last year at Wingfoot, he was on the practice greens, and Bryson takes this as far out on the bell curve as anybody basically out there. He was using a launch monitor to gauge the distance on practice putts, long putts. But when you're at the U.S. Open, you're not going to be able to put it right next to the flag every time. You're going to have a lot of long ones. And so he's trying to gauge the speed of the greens, and usually they try and match the practice green with what you're going to get on the golf course. So they're not trying to trick you. He had a launch monitor set up and was hitting putts with a ruler, so that he knew if he keeps his tempo, if he took it back 18 inches and flowed through 18 inches, how far was that putt going to go? 12 inches. How far was that putt going to go? He's trying to take the art out and put the science and the math in. So hopefully you've got a big TiVo with a massive hard drive, because there are going to be players who are going to emulate this type of systematic approach, which I think can work. But I'm with you. Like, I love the romance of the art of golf, but there are conscious attempts being made now to minimize that and get the consistency of the science and the math that I'll be fascinated to see in 5 years how many more players are doing things like that.
And good for Bryson for pushing the boundaries. I have nothing against what he's doing, right? But why give them all of that data without them working for it? It just doesn't. It doesn't make a lot of sense to me, and it takes out one of the most enjoyable parts of the game.
And Tyler, as a FlightScope rep, you're essentially Bryson's enabler on all this. Do you care to respond? And what else has he got cooking?
I think what David said is right. I mean, I agree with you to a certain level, but I think that he is so far to that direction that for someone to try to do what he's doing would be the wrong thing to do, to be honest with you. It takes so much time to get to that point. And like you said, I enjoy seeing people sort of feeling and being able to sort of feel the putt and read it themselves without all of that other stuff that goes into it. But I think Bryson does what he does for a reason. He believes in that way, and he thinks that that's the only way to do it for him, and it works for him. And it not necessarily will work for other people. So I mean, I see it both ways. Bryson is going to do everything that he can do to be prepared, and if that means having a million things on the green. I mean, I remember times a few years ago where he'd have like 10 people around him on the greens, and because he stays at the course so late, a lot of times we would all have our phones with the flashlights out on the green and things like that so that he could stay there longer in practice. So yeah, Bryson is an anomaly for sure.
Yeah. I forgot to mention at the top that anyone in the audience, feel free to use the chat, as many of you already are doing, to introduce yourself, say hello, add your comments, and then I will try to work in the questions from the questions tab throughout. In fact, I think this is good just for establishing everyone's personal vantage point of the game. We have a request for a rapid fire. What is everybody's handicap? I will abstain because unless we're talking mini golf, it's not even worth sharing. So let's go. Brett, Tyler, David, Sal, handicaps. Let's go.
I'm a scratch. I play in amateur events and stuff too, so
maybe I should have started with Brett. Tyler,
I'm a 10 at the moment.
David,
Brett, you bring your. I'm going to bring my 9.5 strokes. You bring your wallet the next time we play. That's all I'm going to say.
As long as we can play at Century, it's no problem.
Sal?
I'm a scratch.
Sorry, I don't hear me. Sorry, I missed you there.
Scratch.
Oh, you were also. Well, there we go. We should take the rest of this out onto the course.
Yeah.
And then I know there were some other questions. We'll work on those later. David already mentioned the sort of how the tolerances of the golf club manufacturing and how much that's improved and how things might even change. I'd love to hear more detail about what you'd like to see with some of the club manufacturing. Should there be changes, and what's on the horizon?
I think that there's a real tricky issue that we sort of kicked around before we really sort of started this, which is the goal to try and help recreational players, have a good time, play more, get more out of it, and maybe for them to shoot lower scores? Or are we going to hold that everyone who plays the game needs to play by the same set of rules, use the same type of equipment, if you can afford it, and those kind of things? And it dances around an issue that we in golf refer to as bifurcation, which is essentially two sets of rules. The elite players, sort of like in Major League Baseball, they're using wooden bats. My 16-year-old son can use composites, can use aluminum, can use wood if in some events. But by and large, it's the same game. But there are some modifications that are made. In golf, there's really no such thing. Golf, we use the same stuff. If the goal is to have everybody use the same equipment, companies have gotten so good at making gear, and they're so good at personalizing it, using launch monitors, using all different types of pieces of equipment from a fitting standpoint, that everything from an equipment standpoint is really optimized for the most elite players. And I think you could argue probably successfully that over the last 10 to 15 years, they have derived the most benefit from most of the advances in golf balls, as well as golf clubs, drivers, and those kind of things. They've gotten bigger, exotic materials, etc. So it really comes down to how we want to determine what we're looking for and what success is going to be in that sort of broad range. I've talked to a lot of engineers and a lot of people who build golf clubs, really smart folks with mechanical and chemical engineering. And they have told me that you really can't change, for example, a driver. You can't make it shorter. You can't make it smaller. You can't make it less of a trampoline effect to bring down the pros to the level that people kind of seem to want, without really doing harm to recreational players, without really, ripping out their hearts. And now all of a sudden, a guy who used to hit it 200 yards can hardly hit it 150 or 160. That's not what the USGA and the RNA are looking for. But they have told me, look, if you want to make a driver shorter, Jason Day and Rory McIlroy are going to still launch it 300 yards. If you want to make it smaller, well, they've already got 3 woods and 5 woods that are nuclear powered. Like they're going to mash that thing out there. If you want to make it less flexible, then yeah, they'll slow it down, but you'd have to rein it in so much to be able to have a meaningful effect that, again, recreational players who don't have this issue, they're going to get and so we're trying to do this balancing act with golf that I think is really, really going to be difficult. I'll be fascinated to see later this year if the USGA and the RNA announce some changes from an equipment standpoint with regard to distance. But I'm at a little bit of a loss as to, from a manufacturing standpoint, what do you do if you're trying to make both sides of that argument happy?
Sal, obviously Arcos has you're sitting on a wealth of data from what you've collected from all of your club sensors. How are you seeing it play out?
I mean, I think there's no doubt that distance is not an issue for 99, as in distance is a problem in the other way for 99.999% of golfers, meaning they can't hit it far enough when you look at the data and everything. So I think just trying to, like, the 125, 150 PGA Tour pros trying to solve like a problem, which, by the way, I honestly don't understand the exact issue that they're trying to solve. Is the issue that the defense of par is getting weaker, or is it that long hitters have a bigger advantage compared to shorter hitters on tour? So I honestly don't understand the exact issue that they're trying to solve when they say that distance is a problem. And so is it that people are shooting too low a score, or is it that long hitters are hitting? Nobody's clarified that to me. And maybe David, you know what that problem is, but there are probably different solutions for that. Like if you're trying to bring together, like give people who are not so long hitters on tour the same opportunity, or some like a legitimate chance to beat longer hitters, there's a different solution versus like, oh, the people are shooting lower scores. And the lower scores piece, historically, golf has always improved, like over the past 500 years. Like even when you look at the first U.S. Open scores, they were in the 80s. I think it was like 2 rounds of play, and it'd be winning scores would be like 164. Maybe it was USAM qualifying, but the scores have gone down over time, and so has like runners. Like, I mean, people run faster now than they did 100 years ago. We're not adding inclines on those races to get the time back to what it was 100 years ago. So I don't understand the problem we're honestly trying to solve. And it's hard for me to answer that. I can say for the average golfer out there, distance is not an issue, meaning where nobody's hitting it long.
Brett, wouldn't you agree? Because I know that you're really up on this kind of stuff, that as pros on the PGA Tour, the folks you see on television have become so much more analytically minded that they are rewarded for playing much more aggressively than we used to sort of think about. And if you want to get yourself onto the PGA Tour, and the notch right below it, AAA, if you will, it's referred to as the Korn Ferry Tour. Well, those guys hit it even farther than the people on the PGA Tour. They tend to be younger. They tend to be a little bit more fit and that kind of thing. As we become more and more analytically based in terms of how golf the elite level is played, wouldn't you anticipate that we're going to go deeper into like junior level players playing, like the level of accuracy and its level of importance diminishes, and distance, because the analytics say just like hit it far, that we're going to drive even further down that road the more that players look at the stats?
Well, ask Scott Fawcett a decade, and the exact opposite will be true. And everyone starts playing like Will Zalatoris, and everyone starts playing more conservatively, because that is actually how the stats bear out that you shoot the best scores.
So you don't make bogeys, and therefore like you're going to do better. Yeah.
I mean, there's all sorts of. It's using the shot link data to find counterintuitive points, and that's the reason Will Zalatoris, who's like probably finishes second in the Masters, it's don't make mistakes, hit it in the middle of the green, get up there on a par 5, hit it, don't go pin hunting on your second shot, hit it in the middle of the green, make a bogey. That's what Will said. Will said when he was on Korn Ferry, he realized he had one of the worst par 5 scoring averages because he kept trying to hit it at the hole. And Scott told him, like, no, well, the way it bears out is just hit it over there, and you're gonna hit it in the middle of the green, and you're gonna make a birdie. And if you make a couple bombs here and there, that's fine, and you won't make as many bogeys, and you'll never make a double. So it's funny that, but distance is part of that as well. It also means hit it as far as you possibly can off the tee, because that's where stats bear out that you have the best chance to score, right? So, I mean, the problem then is, how does that trickle down into the lower levels of golf that don't have all of that data available, which is interesting. Then Sal, having amateurs have all of this data of their own at their own fingertips to see how they can optimize their own game is interesting. How that's gonna change the way people play.
Yeah, I think like one of the things, Brett, like which I don't think gets talked enough is recovery shots. So in driving, if you put yourself like in a position where you have to hit a recovery shot back to out into the fairway or wherever, where you don't have a clear shot for the green, that's a pretty big penalty for an average, like for a tour player. So I know how PGA Tour does recovery shots, and sometimes I think they're maybe not penalizing the drive as much as they should be, which I think leads to these outcomes where it maybe on the surface appears that you got to hit it as far as possible, but every recovery shot essentially is like at least half a stroke penalty. So from a strokes gain perspective, you've lost essentially half a shot on a recovery shot. And so distance, while it's important, if it's actually impacting, like you're having to hit, let's say, half a recovery shot around, and it's a quarter for a stroke lost every round on that. So that's something I feel like maybe, I mean, I know we do recovery shots a little bit differently, Arcos does, than the PGA Tour. And PGA Tour has like overall benchmarks of like, okay, on average, this is how many strokes, if you're in a recovery shot position, that the tour player takes. But if you're hitting a recovery shot out sideways, the penalty should be much stiffer on the drive. And so I think that there's some issues around factoring recovery shots in, which maybe overinflate how important distance is.
I mean, this gets back to your earlier question, Sal, too, of what the problem is with pros increased distance. And the problem is golf courses. I mean, that is the biggest issue, is that great golf courses are becoming obsolete because they're too short and holes.
No, how are they? Like, that's my question. Like, how are they actually becoming obsolete? Like, they're not identifying the right winner?
You can't play them anymore. That's why. Because there are certain holes that are designed to be played a certain way, and then when you can fly a 3-wood to the front of the green, all of the strategy has been taken out of it. So, there's a lot, and so I think this gets into a bit of an architecture debate as well. I mean, I think the example I always go back to is the President's Cup at Royal Melbourne, which is just one of the most outstanding designs. It's brilliant. Essentially no rough whatsoever. Terrific green complexes that are all strategic on where do you place your drive to where the pin is. And you watch the way the players who played the best. I mean, Tiger Woods played unbelievable that week because he's probably one of the smartest players to ever play the game. He's one of the best golf minds the game has ever seen, and he knew where to hit it. And if you're flying it like Justin Thomas was doing it, flying it at the hole and expecting it to stop and bounces over the green, and hey, good 5. And where Tiger hits it 15 feet left, it spins, it comes back. Now you have a 10-footer for birdie. So it doesn't necessarily need to be super long. And then I think what some of your stats bear out too is that width actually helps everybody, because now you have to think your way around a little bit. So the problem with super distance is that, and there are some places at Royal Melbourne where that happened too, where you could drive it up near the green, and now it's a little different. And you can't really design green complexes like that anymore very few owners are going to let you do it unless you're Tom Doak, and then you get to do what you want. But there's, it's very difficult for that. And it's very difficult for the pros to go to places like that anymore, because the distance is just too much. And so the width is actually what brings everybody back in. It makes you think. It brings strategy back in. So the golf courses and the way they set up golf courses is the problem with distance, because it's making the game less interesting.
I mean, I would generally I agree with what you're saying, but I will say if the goal of a course is to find the best winner, I'm not so sure that shorter courses like a 7,000 yard course can't do that as well as a 7,500 yard course.
Absolutely. But you have to set it up the right way, and it has to be the right golf course. I mean, look at the US Open at Merion, right? That still had rough, but it still identified the best winner because those holes are so good. So there's a lot of gray area here, but essentially it's the distance debate is it's killing great golf courses and it's making golf less interesting.
All right, well, I appreciate the spirited debate here. That's what this is all about. But try to get into a few more topics. One of the things that's interested me, I had a chance to tour the TPI, the Titleist Performance Institute, a couple of years ago, and obviously there were 6 different motion capture bays, and everything is there. But obviously the biomechanics, the kinematic sequence of the golf swing is becoming better known and suddenly becoming a lot more accessible. I'd love to know, obviously the pros have the utmost technology at their fingertips, but for for us and for those, in our audience, what are you seeing, trickle down? I know there's, like the K-Motion vest and some wearables. Increasingly, there's some, you can use your phone even, and other camera systems. What's percolating, in the space right now, and what's becoming available? Okay, David?
I think it's not as much about new stuff, although obviously there is new stuff that keeps coming out all the time. It's, as you sort of alluded to, the percolating down to levels where certainly collegiate programs, the elite collegiate programs, have practice facilities and access to technology that before 10 or 15 years ago, players on the PGA Tour wouldn't have. I mean, if you go to some of the elite programs at, say, Florida, Oklahoma State, Arizona State, Pepperdine just won the national championship last week. These schools have access to all that stuff. There are facilities in almost every state, in every basically good golf community, where you can get junior players, recreational golfers, into these types of systems where they have access to driving ranges and practice facilities. Like I wrote about recently, there's a system called Top Tracer Range. There's another one called TrackMan Range, where you can go to a practice facility and have a launch monitor virtually around you that you just use your smartphone or your tablet to get access to that. This is all new tech being made available to recreational players. Sal's product, with Arcos, to give you that kind of data on a golf course with real shots. That's still relatively new. Sal, you guys, 2013, 2014, you started Arcos. So we're within a decade of these types of technologies reaching the consumer level. So to me, it's yes, that we have a lot better understanding biomechanically about what's happening. Companies like Whoop telling you how you're recovering from, exactly. Oh, there you go. That get the right word. That's to me, like those are places where we're separating the person, which is basically being the tool, and then getting a better understanding about how you're going to be able to swing the club dynamically, getting onto launch monitors like a FlightScope to tell you the real nuts and bolts, but then all that stuff getting down to a lower and lower levels, juniors who are going to grow up with all of these things. The types of players we're going to see 10 to 15 years from now, I think are going to look dramatically different. They're going to approach the game differently. They will have never grown up without access to the information that right now dazzles us. That will be passe to them. And what that's going to look like for golf as well as the rest of athlete, for all athletes, is really going to be pretty wild to see.
Tyler?
Yeah, I think you're seeing it now. We have the Mevo, which is our small little one. You can see how small it is in my hand. You throw it in your backpack like a rangefinder or your golf bag and go to the range with it, or use it at home. And with all of the resources available online now, with online lessons with companies like Skillist and Me and My Golf and those guys that are starting to even focus on the fitness side of it, you can do a lot of that stuff at home, and then you can validate that it actually is working with technology that we have available for consumers now. So it's really, doing all of that is great too. And we see it all the time. People will reach out to us and say, hey, my club head speed is improving, but I'm not hitting it further. And so we have to sort of educate people on, that's not the number to look at. You have to still hit in the club center of the club face. Your ball speed needs to improve. Your smash factor, which is the efficiency of the strike, needs to improve. So there's a lot of education that goes into it too, and doing it the right way. A lot of people see videos of Bryson, swinging as hard as he can and doing these speed training session, and there's reasons why he does that, but the fitness and everything behind that needs to be there too. So I think definitely education is very important with chasing speed and all of the fitness that's available now too.
So
in terms of I actually completely agree with David. The new generation of golfers that's maybe being born right now is going to be very, very different. The expectations and the understanding. I think we are getting more aware of golf through data, whether it's your swing metrics or your on-course data, ShotLink, Arcos, Track, and all of that. I think there's going to be a lot more insights that are coming. I do think right now, golf for the average golfer is in its infancy in terms of data analytics, because the insights have to be really simple for the average golfer. So with the PGA Tour pros with Bryson, he has like this as his full-time job. He has people around him who are helping him interpret the data, understand how to act upon that data. The average golfer today doesn't have that. Like, like if my spin is 3,000 RPM with a driver, is that good? Is that bad? I would say most golfers would have no idea. And so like how to act upon that data piece, by and large in golf, is missing at the, like, I would say average golfer, amateur golfer, and level. I think that education and that whole movement is gonna, like, the education will increase, the education levels will increase, the awareness will increase. So over time, golfers are going to get smarter about how to make better decisions, how to buy, like, what golf ball should you be playing with, a Pro V1 or Pro V1X or TP5, TP5X, whatever it is. Today, like, I would say there's a lot more decisions being made by average golfers just on feelings. In the future, there will be data-driven decisions. And I think
Joe, you're
very far.
You're a baseball guy. There was a time when the whole idea of, OPS was considered wonky. The whole idea of BABIP, batting average on balls in play. My 16-year-old son who plays baseball can recite his stats about that stuff. Golfers will go down the same line. All athletes are going to go down the same line.
Yeah, it just takes that's one of the best things that MLB has done was with StatCast. A lot of these metrics have become much more accessible, much more available, and I see the same happening in golf. There was
until you hear a 16-year-old talking about his velo, in which case then all bets are off.
Actually, there's a comment here about if Arcos combines a swing analyzer with a shot tracker, you'd have an incredible product, and it sort of speaks to golf. Certainly, there are no shortage of tools, but we need to see them talking to each other more to gather some of these insights. And David, just before we went live, you were talking about that. I think it was the Precision Pro rangefinder. We'd love to hear more about that and what that new feature is.
Yeah. So I think the trend we're going to see over the next couple of years, we've seen laser rangefinders, for a long time, 20 years probably at least, where golfers have had access to those, and they've been pretty reliable and pretty good. And what the future of that stuff is now is combining different pieces of technology and being able to use, usually the power of Bluetooth, but there are some other near field communication things that allow that to happen as well. Precision Pro has a new laser rangefinder out that uses Bluetooth to tether to your smartphone. Now, why would you want that? Well, having a laser rangefinder to be able to tell you, like, okay, the flag is 150 yards is something we've had. But when it tethers to your smartphone, it can then tell you, like, oh, you're playing in Vail, Colorado. We know that you're at 6,500 feet of altitude. We also know that today it's 86 degrees. We know the relative humidity. We know that this shot, because you're playing the sixth hole, goes down 5 degrees. It can then give you not just the straight line distance, but a very, very personalized, what we refer to as slope, or adjust a plays like yardage. This is where things are starting to go. I've got this stereo speaker right here that Bushnell sent to me, which has a couple things. Number one, the magnet is really handy because you can jam it onto your cart, which is good. But the top part comes off, and you just carry this little disc in your pocket. You push the one button that's on here, and this speaker tunes out the music and then tells you using GPS how far it is to the front, middle, and back of the green on the hole you're playing. So from a convenience standpoint, it's kind of cool. But when I start to see the stuff from Precision Pro and other companies I've talked to in the space, they're like, the future is combining your smartphone and all the capabilities of smartphones with their products and being able to then blend these technologies together. And it opens up a world of new possibilities.
Brett?
Yeah, I mean, it only makes sense that things communicate with each other more often. And that's been the way with a lot of launch monitors too, right, Tyler? I mean, you used to have to look at the thing, and now you can look at it on your phone or your iPad, and you see all the numbers you need to see. So it only makes sense that things communicate more, and the more people have access to them, the more they're going to be educated about, what to look for and what's good and how to adjust themselves. To going back to Sal's point too, I mean, the more people understand those numbers, the more they're going to be helpful for them.
Tyler?
I mean, I think the future is most definitely. Sorry, Tyler, right?
No, go for it. No, go for it.
No, go for it. Go for it.
I mean, there is going to be integration. I think over time, there's no doubt, and it will be based on like I think right now there's enough technologies. Nobody is 100% sure what's going to be around, what's not. And so as a result, we certainly aren't integrating as much as we would be. There are enough players out there. I think there'll be consolidation at some point. And it does make sense to integrate like range data to on-course data to find patterns. And also, I think capture more of the on-course data. Right now, for example, Arcos captures like your shot link type data. We do a little bit more than shot link. But it'd be cool to capture your swing data for the shots and stuff. So I think like that evolution, there's no doubt. Like when you look at the arc of history of data collection gets better, more seamless over time. Data analytics get better, and we're really early in terms of where data analytics are in golf and what we're going to do with it. But there will be integrations, no doubt.
Yeah, I think comparing that data is very important too, right? So the difference between what someone's doing on the driving range or at home into a net versus what they're actually doing on the course is, for a lot of golfers, maybe going to be a little different. You know, maybe people are swinging a little bit harder on the driving range when there's no pressure or target or anything. You're just kind of seamlessly hitting balls. And so I think sort of seeing the difference between those two would be very interesting, and giving people, you know, more knowledge on, you know, exactly how far they're hitting it on the course versus what they're doing on the driving range or at home.
We have a question coming in from Michael Burnett. How do we make technology available to those who can't afford to pay to get access to all that great tech? It's certainly an issue that all sports are having, where we have these great tools, but it can, baseball, for instance, it can increase the divide. A lot of the teenage players, who don't have access to the best training tools, don't necessarily get the best development. Is anyone? We didn't prepare for this one, but is there any thoughts? Anyone want to jump in to answer this one?
I can take like a first crack at it. I think like the bigger problem with golf isn't like, even before the technology, is just getting access to golf, and that's expensive. I know First Tee and there are other organizations trying to get maybe people who don't have the same advantages in life that we've been fortunate to being introduced to the game, to introduce them to the game. We partner with First Tee to provide sensors to First Tee participants so they can track at least their strokes gain data. And all the on-course data that we do provide access to. But I think it's a general issue with golf, with like the capital required, the big land for the golf course, the equipment being what it is. And then also early on, like the kids growing at the pace that they are, so the club's changing. I know there's US kids and all that stuff, but none of that's like super cheap. So I don't know what the real solution is. I do think like the organizations, like PGA Tour maybe would be a good entity to ask this question for I don't know, what is the PGA Tour doing stuff for this, David? Do you know? Or
I haven't heard that the PGA Tour is doing stuff. I know the PGA of America has different programs to try and get kids involved. The PGA Junior League is really cool. It's essentially Little League but with golf. It's co-ed. It's done at age group levels, and they do a really cool job. The kids wear jerseys with numbers on them and their name. It's great. I think though, Sal, and you please correct me if I'm wrong, the really lousy answer to this question is time. The maturity of the technologies and the further penetrations of it means that the cost goes down. I mean, what would have cost 20 years ago to create an Arco system with the depth and sophistication that you're able to have now, or a FlightScope, Mevo 20 years ago, was an undoable product from a size perspective, certainly a size at cost perspective, but eventually that price came to where it is. As we go on and the technology matures, the price can come down, and therefore it becomes accessible to more and more people, which is not a great answer. It doesn't really go to the root of the problem, Joe, that you talk about, which is this digital divide in the world of sport. But I don't know that any organization, at least that I've heard in golf, says that, yeah, you know what, this is our problem. We've got this. Whether it's the PGA Tour is owned by the players. So players individually can do some things, but I don't know if the tour sees itself as being this, like, it's our job to do this, or the LPGA Tour. To some degree, the PGA of America, which is I believe it's 28,000 men and women teaching professionals. They're much more at the grassroots level. They could see it, but it's a problem that's not really owned by anybody. So I don't know how much they're going to jump in on the solution.
I mean, I will say that to me, like yeah, sure, like FlightScope, like technologies is certainly much more expensive. Like Arcos is like $120 a year, so it's not like I think like the cost of golf itself is an issue.
Yes,
and that needs to be solved before like you can introduce tech into it. At least like at earlier stage in life. I don't know what the business models are around it, but something I think creative people with resources could do something about it. And my sitting where I sit, like it seems like I feel like I would call out PGA Tour to be more engaged on that, because they probably will be the biggest beneficiaries. You increase the talent pool, you'll increase like the product at the end of it.
I think it's for some obviously terrible, awful reasons. Last year wound up being one of the best years golf's ever had. And 2021 is shaping up to be a really, really good year for the industry as a whole. It would be wonderful if many, not just one group, but many groups were able to take this and play a little bit of the long game. It's like, yeah, we're going to invest in making the sport and the game much more accessible, much more economically doable for more and more families, more and more kids, more and more women, people of color. Like this is what the sport needs to attract for growth 20 years from now. This year is going to be a great year. You know, if unless something hopefully really, really terrible doesn't happen, we're gonna have another great year. We need to be thinking past that, which is much. This question branches off into a whole nother world of different issues that this sport and every sport's going to have, but golf in particular, because we've done such a terrible job of attracting, candidly, non-white guys into the sport, just calling it what it is. And we need to be much more open about this. And the economic part is a big factor in that.
We are down to about Tyler, did you have something to add?
No, I just wanted to add, I always, when we talk about this subject, I always think of a guy like Bubba Watson, who always tells us the story about how when he was a kid, you know, he would get 1 to 2 clubs a year because that's all that his family could afford. And so that's how he learned to hit different shots. And so being able to hit a 7-iron, you know, 230 yards so that he could hit it off the tee and things like that, where he would get, you know, only 1 or 2 clubs every year. So he'd have to just kind of figure out how to play with the clubs he had. But yeah, no, I agree with everything you're saying. It is a problem for sure.
I just want to chime in one second here, is that I think the biggest thing about the technology too is that really when you start digging into how do people actually get better, you get into the neuroscience of learning, and the best teachers are not technical. The worst way your brain learns is through explicit information, right? And the way you learn best and the way you retain memories and create new memories and relearn motor patterns is implicitly. So it's failing and it's doing it. It's exactly what Bubba Watson did. It's having 3 clubs. It's not, sorry guys, it's not understanding the ball flight numbers. And it's not necessarily understanding the data of ShotLink. It's going out there and playing and figuring out for yourself, because that's how lessons are learned. That's how your brain learns. So really the best teachers now are disseminators of information. The information is outstanding, but how you relay that to the student is really important. And that is way more important than the actual data itself. So I think that's really the future of teaching. I think the future of golf really is understanding that it's a game and you go out and you play it, and that's how you get better. And so the data is great, and from an intellectual level it's really helpful, but when it comes to actually being able to physically perform, it's very different. And I think that's still why golf is so attractive and so enjoyable to play and to watch, because there's so much more than an intellectual exercise going on.
Very well said. We're down to our final 4 minutes of this hour, and we have 4 panels, so each of you has a minute on the clock. And the question here is, what should our audience, you know, presuming this is sort of regular golfers out there, what's the tool they need to know about, or what's the one tip that you have that everyone should walk away with knowing? Whoever wants to go first, just jump on it.
I mean, you're asking me to do shameless self-promotion.
That's fine.
Yes,
No, I think you need to score better. You need to know where you're losing strokes on the course, because that's like basically. I mean, that's how PGA Tour players use ShotLink, and otherwise you're wasting your time taking lessons. You might be like a really good driver of the golf ball, but you think you can get better. Like golf improvement isn't linear, and so whatever your weakest is, generally where you can actually improve the fastest, and knowing where your weakest link is really important. And just like DJ practices his wedge shots a lot because that's where he loses strokes, and as he's gotten better with it, that's shown in his rankings and his victories. So I think knowing your strengths and weaknesses is really important, because then you can practice that appropriately. And strokes gain and Arcos, or tools like Arcos, I would say we're absolutely best in class, are very helpful in terms of helping you improve.
Tyler?
Yeah, I mean, I would say, with our technology, one of the big things that we always talk about is adding pressure to your practice sessions too. So like what Sal said is identifying your weak areas, but then going to practice them, because that's how you get better, and adding pressure to that. So our Mevo Plus product has what we call our FlightScope skills app, where you hit at virtual targets and you can create customized challenges. So, for instance, if your weak point is wedges, you can set a combine for 120 yards and actually add pressure so that you're not just hitting balls out into the range without thinking about anything. You can actually try to dial in your distance and control. And so adding that pressure and is something that we've tried to add into our technology and into our software, and kind of like what Brett said too, is make it a little more visual, so that it's not just numbers, but it's actual graphics and things that people can kind of, like to learn about and look at, and not just, a bunch of numbers on a spreadsheet. So making the software a little bit more visual. We have simulated golf courses now too, where you can actually play around with the Mevo Plus product. So yeah, just adding that pressure and even the entertainment side of it too, having fun with it a little bit too is fun. So
Yeah, Brett?
I think the point is to have fun, right? Go and enjoy it and hit shots. Learn how it goes left, how it goes right, and be present to what you're doing. There's a great teacher, Fred Shoemaker, out in California, and his thing is just be aware of where you are, right? And be present to your motion, and don't be inside your own head. And that's how you learn what the feels actually mean. So then you feel what it means to go left, what it means to go right, and then you could know what it feels like to hit one straight. And that's where you get enjoyment from the game, I think, where it's hitting shots and seeing them and being able to execute them. And that comes from something a lot more interesting than being able to just technically perform on a ball flight monitor and being able to put numbers up. So I think the game's about enjoying it, and playing better is a huge part of it, but it's also just being present to the moment. I think that's kind of the most fun of it.
Well, David's visual reaction suggested that he is very skeptical of your fun arguments here.
Fun. I'm 100% behind it. If it's not fun, then what's the hell is the point? And I'll try and make this sort of quick, but I was January before COVID really sort of hit. I had a chance to go to Chicago, and on a snowy Sunday, watch a guy who was reasonably athletic, about 38 years old, walk in and get custom fit for new clubs. And my recommendation to everybody who's technology and where we go is you can do all these different things. You can track your shots on the golf course. You can try and get it, keep the fun involved. Most people still, unfortunately, go into a pro shop, golf specialty store, whatever, see something shiny and cool, plunk down their hard-earned money, and they buy it and walk out. That's what this guy did. He had equipment that didn't work for him. When he went through a custom fitting, he literally, and I'm not making this up, got 48 yards longer with the driver, and his dispersion pattern tightened up because it was a driver that was designed for the way that he swings the club. Custom fitting, a lot of people think, is just for elite players and tour players. Like, oh, I'm not good enough. When in fact, those are the players who benefit from it the most. So there's some amazing technology out there. Not all of it is right for every person. And unless you're in the business, it's going to be very difficult for you to know what is best for you. But there are people out there who will very easily show you and let you try stuff. So my recommendation is, when you hit more good shots, what you're trying to do more often, you're going to have more fun. You're probably going to score a little bit better. It'll get you more enthusiastic about the game. So I would highly recommend, if anybody's out there who's never gone through and gotten custom fit equipment, that is definitely the way to do it, and that's what I would recommend.
It's clearly the only thing separating me from being a scratch golfer. Like a couple.
There's a
of years
green
ago.
jacket in your future, Joe. Just go ahead.
I can't wait. I am 38 years old, so this seems like it's right up my alley. All right. Well, this has been a wonderful session. I can't thank enough Brett, Tyler, David, Sal. Thanks for joining us. Thank you so much for our audience and your active engagement. And then join us next week for SportTechie Live, quantifying and optimizing sponsorship value, how brands are using data to drive better business outcomes, powered by Reload Metrics. Thanks again, everybody. Enjoy the US Open next week.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Thanks. Bye-bye.